Welcome back, guys. Episode 7. We're making a little demo RPG game in C++, and today we're going to look at some buffs and equipment for our characters. And that's going to be pretty much the episode. Basically, just prepping up to start doing combat and start tying together more stats and stuff. So thank you for joining. Appreciate you guys, and hope you're looking forward to some coding. Alright, so first thing first, let's get a little buff system going on. So let's go ahead and just make a new class for these, or a new struct, and we're just going to call it buff.h. We might also make debuff too, but for now, let's just make a quick struct of a buff. And everyone probably knows what a buff is. It's basically something that's like a temporary stat boost. And that's all this is going to be. We're going to keep it real simple. So we're going to have a an unsigned int for, we'll make it a unit 16 for duration. Just how long it's going to last, because a buff implies that it's temporary. Duration. And we're going to need what it affects. So it's going to either be strength, agility, or intellect pretty much, or it could be armor or something like that. So we basically are going to go off this stat block here, and it's going to buff this sort of stuff. We could also buff shields or buff your health or things like that, but that's just going to be healing really. So we're just going to keep it really simple. So for now we're going to go like that, and we'll go stat type. And there might be a case for making this here, because we're probably going to reuse these a lot. There might be a case for making these something more simple. What am I including here? I just typed stat type, like that was going to do anything. I was just thinking stat block. Really all we want is the stat type, but I guess we'll include the whole thing. Now we could do this using some special C++ features. Like we could basically make this sort of an extension, or a, what's the word for it? Basically like an add-on to this, which somewhat makes sense, but it also, we'll probably do that later, because this is really all we need. We need a duration, strength, or we need a duration and what it buffs. So this way, when we instantiate one, we can say what it does and for how long, and then as we go through the rounds, we can tick down the duration, and once they lose that duration, it'll stop doing its thing. So let's also give it a name, and we could also say maybe it's a debuff, okay? Because there's a buff and there's a debuff. So let's just make a boolean here and say is debuff, because if it's a debuff, we'll subtract whatever the stat is, rather than add to it. And we're just going to do this basically as quickly as possible. And we're going to want a constructor, or we could skip the whole constructor and just say you need to instantiate this, set it up how you want, and then apply it. So we still need a system to apply it, of course, but we'll do that here in a second. So actually, let's make a constructor, and let's just take all this stuff in. We've been kind of doing that before. You know, you probably noticed by now that there's a lot of different ways of doing this sort of stuff. You never know, you never know if you're doing it the best way until you get further along in your program and decide for you. And the real big point is here, you got to decide for yourself on your own software when you're doing stuff creatively. What one person does might not be what the other person does, but both work fine. So you just have to pick one and move on. In my opinion, it's really important to not get stuck on the fine, minute details of this way or that way. Sometimes it makes a lot of sense if you're having performance issues and you need to analyze which way uses less memory or is faster. That could be important. But if that's not a concern, you just need to move on and keep going. So hopefully that helps some of you out there that get stuck trying to figure out what to do next. The short answer is just do it. That's the answer. All right, just do what works. We got a duration. And now let's put in the stat types, and you know what, we're going to do this the quick way and just copy a bunch of this stuff right on over. Maybe these is here, All right, so in our stat block here, we don't really have any way to apply buffs, but we will change that here shortly. I'm just going to copy all those. I might just break to a new line here because it's going off screen. So this will be strength, and I'll make it a little more clear here, and agility here. It doesn't like the word int, of course, so intel, we'll call it intel, because int's a keyword, as you probably already know. But basically all we're going to do is, if we're constructing a new debuff, is we're just a buff or debuff, is we're going to set all this stuff. And we also need to say, for this one, a boolean is a debuff. Trying to find a way, I guess we could just spell it with lowercase. And we have some default values here, which I guess we'll leave. It's either, you know, we have the choice here. We've been doing constructors a couple different ways. If we have everything with a default value in this constructor, it's kind of the same as putting an equals in front of all of these and setting their default values that way. But, you know, do whichever way you like. I kind of mix it up sometimes. Duration, I don't know, we'll default to 2-round buff. But, yeah, that should be fine. Now we just need to actually set all these. We got name, going to be whatever the name is there. Duration, you can probably see where this is going. So, strength is str. Intelligence is intel. Try not to go over, let's see, that's column 68, so we could go a little wider. This is somewhat optional here. So it depends on your formatting rules for wherever you're working or whatever. I just typically try to stick around 80 characters or less, but it depends. Sometimes I'll let it go as long as it needs to be. But something like this just kind of ensures that most people will be able to see it on their editor, whatever editor they're using. All right, so we've got the buff ready. Now we just need a way to apply it, because this by itself isn't going to do a whole lot other than just it's a buff. It's a buff, right? So let's go over to our stat block, and let's maybe put like a apply buff. Let me think. How do we want to do this? How do we want to apply this buff? Okay, we've got a couple options. We could add a method in here. Like we could do something like this, like include buff. So if we have that, then we could put a method in here that is apply buff. And we could keep track of the buffs on your stat block. I don't know, this method might be fine. The only problem here is, well, I guess this isn't a big problem, because I'm thinking about this a little bit here. Yeah, if we're applying buffs on the stat block, our player characters have a stat block, so they'll already have this method that you can call just from PC class. So if we do it this way, we'll eventually have something in our player character, and based on this PC class, we'll be able to do something like, let me just put it, I'll just put it way at the bottom here, avoid apply buff, and it will take a buff, whatever the type is, buff here, buff, and we'll basically just make it call the method. I guess this would be forwarded because it's like a PC class thing. And we'll go like something like this, apply buff, and we need to pass forward this buff here. And that should be fine. So it would look something like, just hypothesizing here, really. I haven't really done this standard vector buffs. Buff, we'll call it buffs. And maybe we want a separate one for debuffs here, because you'll see here we'll apply some logic. Okay, so maybe we don't need both of these because we have the flag in here already. whether it's a debuff or not. So we could just probably get rid of that, and that will be good enough. Now we just need to wait to apply these and to remove them, basically. Now we need to be applying these buffs. So this is where things get a little tricky, I guess. Well, probably not that tricky. You got a buff. We're just going to apply it to the stat block, which is going to be a PC thing. And that should take care of it. So we need an apply buff method, basically, here on the PC class. And that should be it. So we'll just do it on the player character delegate here. We'll just make a little function here. And we could even make it virtual. Do we need to, though? I don't think so. Let's see. Access to the stat block already. Maybe we just put that right on the stat block itself. Yeah, I guess we just got to decide where we want to put the function to do this, because I guess, if we leave this protected, then only the delegate could do it. And maybe that's what we want. So let's actually put it in the protected area. And we'll just leave it alone. But this does change maybe some other things. So we'll address those as they come up. And we might need to do a little tweaking to this as we go. We can pretty fairly assume, since we're inheriting from stat block, we get all that stuff. It's a protected method. So thus only this delegate here can access it, and that's where we want to put this apply buff, basically, up there to be called. Yeah, a little redundant at this point, but I think we'll actually end up using it later. So let's just put this in here. We'll put it right here. Apply buff, and all this is going to do, void here, is we're just going to take those buffs. Dot push back, and we want a buff. Now we have to decide, are buffs unique? If we have one with the same name already, do we not want to apply it? We want to maybe just refresh it if they apply a buff with the same name. So that's probably what we want to do. That being the case, this should be buffs, I believe. Yeah, that being the case, because this will just keep adding them to it. So what we actually want to do is we want to do something like this for let's maybe do an auto buffs, and buff and buffs. Just go through them all and just say, like, if b is equal to, or b dot name is equal to buff dot name. We're gonna do a few special things here. Don't worry. We're gonna take this by reference, because we might want to modify. Let's do a little trick here to make sure this works. So this is the one we're bringing in. This is the one we're checking against. Make sure this is equals, otherwise it's going to set it to that. Okay, so since this is by reference, we are actually working with the real one from this vector, not a copy. So thus we can modify it. So we can say if the name is the same, then we'll go whichever one we're on, buff dot duration equals b dot duration. We just refresh the duration if they rebuff us, and then we'll return, which means we get out of this function and we don't end up pushing back anything. So thus, if they try to apply a buff that has the same name as a buff they already have, all it does is refresh the duration to the starting duration, so you can rebuff people, rather, just with that simple method. And that is going to be good for that. And then if it doesn't hit this return, that means it did not find one with the same name, and it's going to end up just pushing that new one to our list of buffs. And that should properly apply or reapply buffs. With that's all you need to do. And of course, we're calling that down here in the player character. You call apply buff. It does it from your PC class. It applies it. Maybe we'll just change these names a little bit. I don't know. We'll stick with our camel case, actually. It's fine. I know it's it looks weird, but doing this stuff, this abstracting like this, it just gives us options to do more logic here if we need to, kind of like we do with this NP. And we're going to keep doing that. So there's going to be a little logic here and there that we end up doing quite frequently. as we go to keep this all sorted out for the front end that is running it. So that's ultimately the point of this player character, is to just be able to add to it and do all the required logic as we need to. Because this, after a while, this little player character is going to get pretty large. Okay, here's where things start to get a little wonky for us, because we have a duration of these buffs, right? So we need them to eventually wear off. We don't want them to last forever. So when we call things like get strength and get strength, should it be getting the base strength, or should it be getting the buff strength? So we might actually need to do some special stuff here. And that's where we're going to add in a few new things, because currently we have all these stats, which is somewhat fine, but we could also keep track of how much, like, the total buffs, and we could work with that as well. So we'll just add that in. There's maybe a better way to do this than I'm thinking, but let's just add it in as a like a total buff. Total. Actually, we'll call this something different. Like, well, I do want total on here. I think total's good. Total strength, but at the end of these, from buffs. I'll just put from buffs on each of these. Total strength from buffs. Total intellect from buffs. There we go. Now we got this whole new set of stats, and these are all going to default to 0. So let's just do that real quick. Put zeros on these. So now what we want to do, anytime we apply a buff, we probably want to retotal these. So anytime either a buff falls off or a buff gets added, we want to reapply all of these. And we need to think about these methods. This gets strength. We want base, like these are the base strength. So maybe we'll actually just put that on here. I'm going to hit the rename key and just rename this base, and rename this one base. So we're just going to keep putting this base word on all these, and just expand this as needed to work with our buff system. So this whole buff system, you might be wondering, okay, this is really adding a lot of complexity. Do we really need to do this? There's a lot of abilities and stuff we're going to do in the future that requires us to be able to buff and debuff, both for players and monsters. And this stat block is going to be used for players and monsters. So yeah, I do think it is quite required for our particular design. Is there a better way of doing it? Maybe. Probably. There usually is. But at this point, that's not what we're worried about. This is all base, right? These are all get base, strength, intellect, etc. So let's just rename these throughout our code. And if you don't know what the hotkey for this is, it's just Control R, R. So you just hover over the variable or function, hit Control R, and then Control R again. And it allows you to put the new name in here. You hit enter. It prompts you and says, hey, what are we doing here? And we're just going to apply like so. Oh, this one I want to do it too. This way we don't have to go throughout all our code and manually rename everything. So one of the super nice features about using an IDE, yeah, there's a few annoyances here and there, like the tabbing issue with macros, but overall the benefits outweigh the negatives. All right, so we need to total these up anytime we apply a new buff. We've got buffs here. Our apply is actually in the delegate, but we probably want to forward that once again to our stat buff thing to handle. So if we push back a buff, this will just add it to the vector. It's not going to do anything else special. So we need either something like buffs.recalculate to call right after that, or we could just make a function that says buffs.add2. And we'll just do something like that. So let's do like an add new buff here and just pass it that B. And that's going to do the pushback and recalculate anytime we do that. because we don't need to recalculate it if it just refreshes the duration. That's fine. So let's go over to our stat block here and just make a protected function called add new buff. And this function is just simply going to do the pushback and do a recalculate. So this should automatically fix everything anytime we do it. And eventually we'll have a remove buff that will also recalculate. So maybe we want a recalculate function in here as well that can only be called from within the stat block, so no one else can mess with it. So anytime you add or remove, we'll just use that function. So let's just work that out real quick. Void privately, we're going to have a void recalculate buffs. I'll make this one with the all lowercase underscore, the way I typically do private functions. Debating on whether this should be capitalized or not, but we want a buff here. We'll bring it in as a copy for now. I don't think we're gonna. Maybe we could do it as a reference, but we'll work that out later if we need to. A lot of times you do want to be copying things. A lot of times you don't. It just really depends on the situation, and we haven't sorted out that situation just yet. But we just need to make sure we're calling this correctly over in player character delegate. Here we go, add buff. Seems happy with that. All right, go back over here. And let's do the thing. So if we add a new buff, all we're going to do is push back. You know, now that I'm thinking about this, we could even do this whole refresh logic in the stat block as well, which I kind of like the idea of. Just the more we can hide it away and it just works properly, the better sometimes. And this will just be buffs dot pushback b and then recalculate. Calculate buffs. All that, and that is supposed to update all of these. So we got get base. We could probably want get total, where that returns both. Jumping around a little here, but you'll see it in a second. So let's add some new functionality here. That's just a get total. And this one will return base plus from buffs. So it's going to give you everything. And I guess if they want the difference, they could do get total minus base, and they could figure out how much they're getting from any particular one of these. We just don't want to overdo the functionality if there's ways the end user could arrange these function calls to get what they want if they need to. So just a little thinking out loud there. My personal preference. We're kind of designing a lot of these classes, as you might realize by now, basically like a library. And we're using this main as a thing to use our libraries. That's basically how this is currently playing out. That's why these are all .h files right now. Okay. All right. So there we go. We got a way to get the base. We got a way to get the total. Now we just need to make sure we recalculate buffs very carefully. We're also going to want a remove buff or tick duration. Maybe a tick duration would be better. We'll come up with that a little later though. So for now, let's make sure we add them correctly, because you know, a tick duration would basically remove them if their duration ran out, and then recalculate, and you should be able to go from there. All right, so let's recalculate. Basically, what we're going to do is just add to everything that gets a new buff, or add them all together. So we're going to just take these stats right here and make some temporary versions of them anytime we call this. And we want to go through all the buffs. For auto, do we want to do it by reference? Now, the answer here I think is no, because we're not going to modify any of the buffs here. We're just going to get these new totals. I'm going to make these undercase. Control U will undercase your highlighted selection, which is another cool feature. So I'm just going to highlight all of this and Control U. Anyway, that way it doesn't interfere with these. And we don't want to shadow those ones. Shadowing is where you have variables of the same name in different scopes. You try to avoid that because it causes confusion. It's called B and buffs. So we go through all the current buffs, and we're just going to say, like, Total strength. Well, we'll just do all these. Let me get this equals out of the way so I can do a multi-select here. So we're basically just going to do this. Plus equals b dot strength plus equals b dot intellect. Now, there's another thing, you might have caught this already, that I need to fix here, because what if it's a debuff, right? What do we do? See if you can think of that before I get to it. All right, so that's going through all the buffs. But we can say if this current one is a debuff, so if debuff is true here, we do something else. Else we add. And basically that's going to be a minus because these can't go negative, right? These are all unsigned. So if it's a debuff, we want to subtract. But if it tries to go below 0, we want to make sure it's just 0. We don't want to be able to lower stats below 0. Otherwise, what's going to happen is that 0, since they're unsigned, is going to wrap to a giant positive number. So if you debuff someone enough, and the code's a little buggy, you're going to actually give them millions of stats. So they'll be hitting for giant numbers because you debuffed them, which will make no sense and make people rage quit, uninstall your game, and give it a bad Steam review. So try to learn some code logic before you release your game on Steam. Otherwise, you're just going to be ruining your own game, which this happens a lot. I mean, you see it, every game you've ever played has lots of bugs. Hopefully they're not this significant as the one I'm just talking about here, because it's pretty game breaking if you debuff something and then it hits a million times harder than ever before. Now, the simplest solution here is probably to actually use integers for the stat type, and if it's negative, snap it to 0. How are we going to address that? Yeah, we'll probably actually just use integers. That's the easiest way I can think of that to do that. But this is actually really easy. uint16, int16. Bam! Problem solved, and one character thanks to this type def. So that is the beauty of these type defs. If you run into a scenario where you need a different variable all over the place, rather than renaming it all over the place, you just do it in one spot, and it's amazing. And now we can easily figure out this debuff logic and make sure it doesn't go negative. Because the other case was if we left them unsigned, we would have had to check if the debuff turned it into a giant positive number and say, hey, if this turned into a giant positive number when it clearly couldn't have been, then just make it 0. So, we could have handled it that way too, but just going with an integer I think is fine. Maybe we'll decide later. We do want this to be a uint, and we will do what I just said on the other case there. All right, enough yapping about that. Let's get on to it. It's basically going to be the same as these, except it's going to be all minuses. Now we just want a little logic here as we go along, and we could do it just at the very end here. I think we'll do it at the very end. So we call recalculate buffs, right? We do all this stuff. But this is just a temporary variable. We just want to we're just working with the totals. So we need to apply this at the end to the real totals, whatever it is. So let's just take these total variables, select just from here to here, and we'll just put it down here, and we'll just say they're equal to whatever this total is after going through this for loop and adding and subtracting them all up. There we go. Little copy pasta action, and then we want to make sure none of these are negative. So that's just going to be the logic of our game. Just they're not going to be allowed to be negative. So we'll just take these totals once again and do a final check here, and say if it's less than 0, then it equals 0, and we'll just do that for all of them. Equals 0. Yep. So we're just going to take this if, go down here, apply that a bunch. It's less than 0. Right there. We'll fix the rest of this here in a second. Just kind of doing this the fastest way I can, and we're going to let the formatting sort out the rest. So equals 0 equals 0. Put a little auto format button, and we're done. Okay, need spaces here. We now have a way to add buffs. Their duration doesn't tick yet, but once we get some combat going, we'll do that. Once we have some more special abilities, we'll be able to apply them and stuff like that. But for now, let's just try adding some buffs to the warrior and see how that goes. We also, actually, hold on, we need to forward this. Okay, so when we call get strength, it's getting the base strength. So we need to think about how do we want to do that with our character. Yeah, I kind of think anytime we're getting the strength, we want the total, not the base, but we might want both available. So once again, we could forward some more functionality, or we could just say, we could just change these. So I don't know. I feel like when you get the strength of something in general, you want the buffed strength. So we'll be getting the total here, I think. Or maybe we just add both. Let's just actually add both. Let's just forward these actually for now. I don't particularly like this because it's just a direct forward, but it's okay. And let's make another one. We just want to be clear whether it's base or not. All right, what's the clearest way to say this? Get, I guess just total. I guess total's fine. And these will change into total as well. So yeah, it's still just forwarding functions. That's fine though. It's yeah, it's kind of ugly, but these will change as we go. But basically, when we get the total, yes, we want the base, the buffed, plus anything else applying it, including magical items, potions, things like that. I guess potions would probably just apply a buff if they're going to do something. But some things will give you like a permanent buff, and we don't necessarily want that on the buff list, but maybe we do. I don't know. We'll have to decide when the time comes. But for now, let's go ahead and test all this work we've done. So we've got our warrior, and we can get his total strength. And we might be able to, you know, in our interface, once we get to graphically putting stuff in there, we'll be able to make a character sheet and do special stuff like, you know, make numbers red if they've been lowered below their base, and make them green if they've been raised above their base at all. So we'll be able to do special stuff with all this later using some logic that we've made. We're looking good. You know, let's add a buff at some point. Let's say when he gains this XP, we just need a place to put this. So we'll just put it right here. Specifically when they get to level 2, let's go ahead and just add a buff. So we'll go p1.apply buff, and we just need to actually construct a buff here. Or maybe we'll do armor buff. I'm just coming up with a name here. But we got to actually make this, of course. So we go buff, call it arm buff, and give it some default values. Let's see, it has a few constructors ready to go. There's the one we made that allows you to put in whatever you want. And we'll just put in here a bunch of stuff. Hold on, it's gonna be 0. Wait, no, it needs a name. We'll just call it like stone shield. Sure, that's gonna be its name. Duration. We're not ticking this yet, but maybe it's a 10 round thing. So we'll put 10 in there. And then for strength, this is going to be however much we want. It's going to be 0, intelligence 0, agility 0, armor. Okay, let's give him some armor. Let's give him 5 armor. And then element resistance 0. Is it a debuff? It defaults to false. So we don't actually have to put that in there because the default value is false. So actually we don't need to put this 0 in there either for the element res. We basically need to go as far as we're changing things. Yeah, all the ones before it, yeah, we got to put something. That's just how the default values work. But once you get to a point where the rest of the stuff is default, since we designed it this way, we can just leave it off there, and that'll apply them properly. And then we're going to go ahead and apply that buff. So once he gets to level 2, we basically should see that our character has 5 more armor than before. We don't have a way to list the buff names yet, but we could add that in there. We could do a little for loop and say display buffs and buff names and durations, and that's something more for a graphical interface. Something you put on a list of all your buffs and debuffs, little icons or something. But let's just go ahead and hit play here. Make sure all this works. And we got a few errors. So let's observe these errors and fix them. I love this part. I know sometimes to some people errors are incredibly intimidating, but really these are a great opportunity to learn something. So these are, you should really take pride in being able to figure out errors. All right, we're getting unknown specifier on strength. What else are we getting? Unknown identifier. It doesn't like the stat type variable. We're pulling that in from stat block, right? Stat type. Yep. Missing type specifier, stat type. Okay, so I think the problem we're running into here is we need to include the old C standard int, which we have here. So that should work. I don't know. I guess we'll just apply it again. That's kind of a little strange there. But I think it just wants that. Let's go ahead and build it again and see what it does. Nope, same thing. So that's not the problem. Let's get rid of that. It's something else. Okay, so I think this is a cascade of issues. Like, it looks like one thing at first, but if we keep going down, we eventually see that it doesn't know what vector is. So we need to make sure we include vector here, because there's nowhere in the stat block or in the buff that we include here that we say include vector. So it's actually getting tied up there. And based on that, it's not able to compile this file, and then the other file is saying, hey, I don't know what this is. That's because another header couldn't be included because it didn't work either. And yeah, so that'll cause some issues. So that's one of the problems there. So we got rid of that one. Let's see what else what other problem it is. No overloaded function takes 6 arguments. Okay, so here's another problem here. We are taking this buff and passing it a character array, but what it actually wants is a string. So a couple different things we could do here. We could say, let's take a character array instead. All right, let's go just char star name. And that is going to work a little better for this here. Because this is a const char, 12 characters. And let's just make sure that works. Nope, still complaining a little bit. Okay, got it figured out. Something a little weird was happening. It was actually all about probably the order of something and the way we're including something. But ultimately, it seemed to have an issue with the whole type def that we had right here. That was the stat type. So we had right here, what was it, standard int 16t, which is all valid. But for some reason, it wouldn't accept this over in the buff. And this might be because we have buff included here. Maybe we needed it below. I don't know. It was something about the include order. So I should say, as a fair warning, like when you're doing your project like this with all headers and only a main to build everything, everything builds as a single object, and that's this main.cpp turns into a main.o, and that turns into your executable. So you get like one object to build off of. This is kind of one of the disadvantages of doing this way. So the order that you include your header files is critically important, because if you include them in an order where you include one first and it has stuff required from a one you include later, you're going to get problems with that. And I believe that's what we were running into, was just the order of headers being included somewhere was not seeing what it needed to see. So we could like toy around with the order of the headers and how they were included, but I decided to just make a types header that has what we need. So we'll be filling this out as we go. So we got C standard in, we got stat type here, and anytime we need stat type, like in buff, we'll just include types, and stat block will include types. And this way, anytime we need it, we can just include it at the top, and that'll get C standard end, and it'll get our types. And that's gonna, yeah, I know we kind of did away with that at one point, but since we're doing this header method, ultimately we probably want to do this for the sake of reducing errors in the future. So that was the big thing. Of course, we did need vector, as we said in that one part. The bigger problem actually seemed to be something about the way we were, or the order we were doing these includes. So yeah, it's just going to be easier to have a types file, I think, and we can go through real quick and say, hey, we'll take this one here, and we'll go and just put that in here as well. This way, you know, as we continue to build stuff, we can just, you know, if we're using any of our special types, we can just go include types, and we can just do this anywhere that we need it, right at the top. This, of course, has pragma once, so it's not going to get double included or anything. Let's just flip through the rest of these, make sure we got all our types sorted out. Okay, we got a few more types here. We're going to get rid of the C standard int. We're going to preemptively go ahead and put types here. And we're going to take these and also just put them in our types. And there we go. That sorts out a lot of that. Let's just go through and make sure there's no more types to find anywhere. Nope. I mean, we do have these enums. Maybe those will end up belonging in the types, but we're not going to worry about that just yet. So let's go ahead and just build this. Make sure it builds. It looks like it is. And what we should see now when we run it is once we get to level 2 on this warrior, we'll get an armor buff that gives us 5 armor for 10 rounds. The rounds aren't calculated yet, but we should basically see at level 2 we get 5 bonus armor from this debuff, or from this buff rather, because we're calling get total armor here, which is going to include the base plus the buffed. And yeah, that should, let's go ahead and hit play and make sure all that works. There's the level 1 warrior, 0 armor, as you can see, goes to level 2, gets his power attack ability, and gets 5 armor from that buff. But now once we go to battle, we can do some kind of tick the buff durations and see if they fall off or not. If they do, recalculate. And it basically should keep these accurate throughout the whole system. And I think that's going to do it for this episode. You can probably extrapolate how to add more buffs here. You basically just apply a buff as needed. But currently, yeah, they're not going to fall off. So right now, anytime you apply a buff, it's just permanent. But we will change that probably in the next episode. We'll probably get to do that. So yeah, that should be good. Now, of course, this supports debuffs as well. All we'd have to do that is go, well, we need an element res there, and debuff, true. So if this is a debuff, it's going to subtract 5 armor. Now, our warrior already had 0 armor, so based on our current armor, if you subtract 5, what should it do? And well, the answer is right in our apply buff logic here in our stat block, or recalculate, and that is, well, if it goes below 0, it should set to 0. So let's just try this as a debuff and just make sure at level 2 it is actually 0. Yep, that looks good. So that seems to be all working correctly, and not seeing any problems with that. So from here we can just call it a day. All right, see you guys next time. Thanks for watching. Greatly appreciate all of you, and peace. Keep coding.